Welcome, foolish readers, to a spooky edition of Shit We've Read, brought to you by the Creeps at Bilo Network.
Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Shit We've Read, a sci-fi and fantasy book podcast hosted by some spooky friends. Spooky season is upon us, so on this episode we will be talking about the second death of Edie and Violet Bond by Amanda Glaze. But I can't do that alone, so let me introduce my co-hosts. First up, I have Laura Benson. Hey Laura, how's it going?
Going pretty well. I'm excited to talk about this book.
I'm excited to talk about it with you as well. Unfortunately, we don't have Bella with us because they are off celebrating their one-year wedding anniversary in Washington.
How dare they?
Boo for them. How dare they choose that over this podcast? But that's okay, because in their place, we have someone just as good. Her name is Erin Harris. She's my coworker and a fellow book lover. But for the purposes of this book, she's also a volunteer and tour guide at the Sacramento History Museum. Hey, Erin, how's it going?
Good. I'm excited to be here.
Why don't you tell us and everybody listening a little bit about yourself?
What is there to say? Well, I obviously work with you, Rico.
Sure.
But
thanks for remembering that.
The people may not know that. Yeah, I do remember that. And I've been with the Sacramento History Museum for about a year now. So I got in as a volunteer and kind of just got, I guess, bullied into becoming a tour guide. And, you know, as someone who had newly moved to Sacramento, I didn't know a lot about Sacramento history. And I feel like I've kind of been pelted with information over the past year. So that's been really fun. And we do a lot of different things. So it's kind of fun to have, you know, people around you who are nerdy and don't shame you for being the same. Yeah.
I get that.
That's me.
Well, again, I'm glad to have you aboard this episode.
Happy to be here.
You're the new kid on the block, so as tradition around here, the first thing we talk about is some of the other shit we're reading.
Okay.
So I'll give you a second to think about that. But Laura, what is some of the other things that you're reading recently?
Right now, so if anybody listened to the last episode, I had mentioned how I was reading all of Christopher Paolini's Aragon books. Unfortunately, I could not stick with it. I read one of four and I was like, oh, these are so long. And instead I switched to Fractal Noise, which is also by Christopher Paolini. So at least I stuck with the author.
All right, half credit.
And that's for anybody interested, that is the prequel to his other book, To Sleep in a Sea of Stars. So this one is total 100% sci-fi. I loved To Sleep in a Sea of Stars, so I was excited to pick up Fractal Noise. I'm about halfway done so far. I don't know what I was expecting, but it wasn't what it is.
Okay.
So I like it, but there's things about it I don't like, and I'm just hoping that by the end things will resolve and I will be like, yes, I loved it. But I will say, and it's so funny because I always think of Emma when I think of Paolini's books.
Sure. Yeah.
The man loves to talk about traveling. The man loves travel, and he'll tell you every detail about that journey. And that is still the case in this book.
Okay, this book, though, is significantly shorter than the previous one, correct?
Yes.
Okay,
so that's way shorter.
Okay, thank God. Because, yeah, last one was like 600 pages of traveling, which is a long
And that's like every Aragon book, too. So I'll get through the Aragon books eventually. They are good.
I believe in you. I believe you, for sure.
It's just, it was a lot for me to commit to when I take so long to finish a book. So
that's fair.
I get it.
Yeah, so that's what I'm reading right now.
Erin, what are you reading right now?
Well, I am a procrastinator, and so I took this deadline as a point to finish the book that we're supposed to read today, like 30 minutes ago.
Hell yeah.
So what I'm going to read next is Wayward by Emily Hart and Halloween Party by Agatha Christie. One, because I prefer to read books written by women, and two, because it's almost Halloween. And obviously,
Makes sense.
those are my only choices.
Of course.
So, yeah. Wayward by Emily Hart is about an intergenerational story of witches and kind of discovering self. And I think Halloween Party is on your list too. So
It is,
you could probably explain that a little better.
Yes, Halloween Party is on my list right now. I'm currently reading it. I don't know. I forgot that I'm reading it right this second. The reason I am reading it is because it is the inspiration behind the new movie that just came out this last weekend, which is A Haunting in Venice. It is the third and the most recent Hercule Poirot film adaptations. The trailer looks really good. I'm really excited about this film. I like the previous two. They did Murder on the Orient Express and then Death on the Nile, and I thought they were both really fun. They both have really big, like, star-studded cast. This is no exception. But I'm one of those book nerds that has to read the book first, which is the correct way of doing it, Laura. That's why
I'm sorry.
Sometimes it's easier to get through. But I like knowing what to expect too. I kind of prefer watching the movie first. It helps me finish.
Okay. To each their own. Anyhow, so that's what I'm reading.
Nice.
The book that we are talking about this episode, as I mentioned earlier, is The Second Death of Edie in Violet Bond by Amanda Glaze. It is a young adult historical fantasy. I think that'd be accurate to say. Any objections?
No, that sounds right.
It was first published October 4th, 2022. And Erin, I'm going to bully you, if you don't mind. Would you like to read the synopsis for us?
Yeah, of course. Sacramento, 1885. Edie and Violet Bond know the truth about death. The 17-year-old twins are powerful mediums, just like their mother. Violet can open the veil between life and death, and Edie can cross into the spirit world. But their abilities couldn't save them when their mother died and their father threatened to commit them to a notorious asylum. Now runaways, Edie and Violet are part of a traveling spiritualist show, a tight-knit group of young women who demonstrate their real talents under the guise of communing with spirits. Each night, actresses, poets, musicians, and orators all make contact with spirits who happen to have something to say. Notions that young ladies could never openly express. But when Violet's act goes terribly wrong one night, Edie learns that the dark spirit responsible for their mother's death has crossed into the land of the living. As they investigate the identity of her mysterious final client, they realize that someone is haunting mediums, and they may be next. Only by trusting in one another can the twins uncover a killer who will stop at nothing to cheat death.
Thanks, Erin.
You're welcome.
All right, so there should be a very obvious reason why we chose this book. It's the very first word that Erin said in the synopsis, and it's Sacramento, and that is where this podcast is based. Mm-hmm. And so when we came across it, we got to represent Sacktown. And it happens to be, fantasy and paranormal falls into our wheelhouse anyway. So before we get into anything spoilery, any details, I want to get your first impressions. Erin, would you like to give us your first impressions?
Sure. Well, let's see. I didn't realize I saw the YA sticker when I got this book at Barnes & Noble, but I didn't realize just how YA it would be at points. Cheesy beyond repair. At other points, it had me questioning myself and my knowledge of Sacramento, only to discover that I was in fact right the whole time.
Oh man.
As you may, this book is part fact, part fiction. So it was kind of fun for me to dive into the things that are real, the things that are not. Finally getting to the author's note where she admits some of the things that aren't real. I felt very reassured personally.
All right. Laura, what are your first thoughts?
I agree on the YA part. There were times that I would just rolled my eyes really? Why did you make that decision? I admit I've lived in Sacramento almost my entire life, and there were things about it that I really didn't understand. I didn't know about something like the landmarks, and I did like Googling. But it was still really fun for me to be able to like know, oh, I know that street. But it was I guess I didn't quite remember what the book was about when I started reading it. So I also didn't really know what to expect. I just knew that they were twins and it had something to do with seances. And I was hoping for a little bit more of the fantasy magical stuff. I mean, it's definitely there. It's just I thought I was going to get more of it, but it was definitely more leaning towards the YA character development or character interactions. But I'd say overall, I still enjoyed it. Jason?
The YA element of the book didn't bother me at all. Maybe it's because I knew it was YA going into it, and so I just dropped my expectations a little bit. It was right in line with what I expected a YA book to be. So when I go to concerts, this is a weird aside. When I go to concerts and the artist is always like, "What's up, Sacramento?" and everybody cheers, I'm like, that's such low-hanging fruit. Like, you mentioned our town, everybody's like, "Woo, they referenced us." I was that person during this book. They're like, J Street. I'm like, hell yeah, J Street. I like that street. I know that street. Cool. State Capitol, the park. Heck yeah, I recognize that. And it was like, God, this book is getting me just for mentioning things I'm familiar with. So it's already going to be like at least a plus quarter star rating, no matter how bad it was or how good it was. That said, I actually quite enjoyed this book. I thought it was pretty engrossing. I liked I guess the main characters are the twins, and I like their relationship. Of course, you got to have your romance in there. It's not a YA book without a little bit of romance, you know.
True.
And the romance worked for me just fine. Nothing mind blowing, but it was a YA romance. I thought, Erin, you mentioned the author's note at the end. I thought that the weaving of what was real and what was fake was done decently well. Not perfectly. There were some things that were mentioned in the book. I was like, I have to quickly look this up. It's like, that's not true. That's fake. That doesn't make any sense. But that's because we are familiar with Sacramento. Someone who isn't familiar with Sacramento reading this, are they going to question those things? Perhaps not. So overall, I did enjoy it.
Nice.
Any other notes before we go into spoilers? Or are we ready just to dive in?
Let's just do spoilers.
Hey, book lovers. Natalie here from the Tipsy Nerds Book Club podcast, your home for the best of science fiction and fantasy with a twist. Whether you prefer dragons or aliens, your cocktail shaken or stirred, co-host Robin Dabney and I have you covered. Past guests have included authors like New York Times bestsellers Hugh Howey and Dorinda Jones, and the nerds are excited to open our 5th season with best-selling authors Tracy Wolff and Nina Croft, co-authors of the upcoming high-concept sci-fi romance book, Starbringer. Join the conversation. We're 2 tipsy nerds and one great story. Available wherever you get your podcasts.
Okay, spoilers. This is your spoiler warning. We're going to go into spoilers. So if you want to read this book for yourself, now's your chance to back out. If you want to continue listening, by all means, glad to have you, but we are going to spoil stuff. Now, if you're still here, the book is about 2 twins who, and this is where it lost me a little bit. What's the main plot of the book? Was it them trying to get money to be independent? Like, was that the main impetus of the book? Because I felt like that was such a
it was confusing. They were chasing down this Mary Sutton client from the beginning.
Right.
And then they finally got her. And of course, things go awry. It wasn't what it seemed. So I think it was kind of just getting to a better life after being runaways was the plot.
Right.
Do you guys agree?
That sounds about right.
Yeah, but I felt like that was such a weird starting point because that's not really.
It was her first novel. And I felt like that was obvious while I was reading it. It was like, wow, this is giving first novel.
That's fair. Yeah, I don't think we mentioned this as a debut, so that's a valid point as well. Okay, so Sacramento. How do we think Sacramento was represented in this book? Do we think it was accurate? Do we think some liberties were taken with perhaps geographical proximities of streets to landmarks?
That's what I had questions about, because obviously, I mean, this took place in 1885. So like, I don't really know what Sacramento was like then. I do know some like basic things, like the book mentioned how they had to build another sidewalk, a higher sidewalk, which is there in Old Sac. But like there were times when she talked about walking to certain places and that she was somewhere, and I was like trying to picture in my head what her walking path would have been. And it sometimes didn't make sense to me. Like at one point she mentioned G Street, and I was like, G Street isn't anywhere near this other location that she just mentioned. And I was like, wait, where is she?
That was the main one that stood out to me, and I saved the snippet here, so I want to read it so get people.
I highlighted it too.
Yeah. Okay. So she says it was a 15-minute walk to the state capitol building. Once there, she dutifully gazed at the white domed building, sat on a bench under one of the shady, fragrant magnolia trees of the brand new park recently planted around California's seat of government. A seat of government that, if more radical papers were to be believed, was largely bought and paid for by filthy rich industrialists. And then she stopped lying to herself, gotten up, and set off down G Street. So that makes it sound like G Street is connected to the Capitol. It's not like she walked towards G Street, she went down G Street. And no, you're like a good, 3-4 blocks away?
It was the locations for me.
Yeah.
Like, when she kept talking about the Sacramento Asylum, which she notes never existed.
That's what I was wondering
in the
about.
author's note. I was like, it was driving me insane while I was reading it. I was like, this doesn't exist. I know some people love, historical fiction, but that is so not my lane when I'm too close to it. And I felt like here I was too close to it. Like it was just driving me up the wall and it was making me go down research rabbit holes. Yeah. But I felt so vindicated in the end when she was like, this never existed. Because there's so many stories about people who, murdered their lovers and were sent off to the Stockton Insane Asylum because it's the closest one to where we're at. So as far as I knew, there was never any official asylum here.
Wow, okay. See, I didn't know that the Stockton was the closest one. Anytime she mentioned any specific theater or building or location, I immediately went to Google to see if that was really in existence or not. The asylum was one reference. She mentioned the Metropolitan Theater on J Street. I don't know if that actually existed or not. At some point, she made a specific reference to a clairvoyant who lived on 625 F Street. So I immediately went, 625 F Street, what's there now? Which is nothing. So maybe a building was there, but it's nothing now. I wish I was able to remove myself from the Sacramento part and just enjoy the story for what it was. And that's entirely my doing. I could have just taken it as this is all fake. It's in Sacramento, but it's all fake, and just enjoy it. But I'm not that kind of reader. I'm going to start questioning everything that you say.
I couldn't do it either. And you know what made it worse? When I went into the museum to give a tour, and the guy at the front desk goes, oh my God, what are you reading? I've seen that book before. And he told me that the woman who wrote this, Amanda Glaze, apparently she's from Northern California. She came to visit family, and she took a tour of the underground. And our tour guide manager, or former tour guide manager, apparently he gave such a compelling tour that it inspired a lot of this book. She used a lot of the information she got from this book. And she was so convinced by his character, who is a Scottish man, that she didn't realize that he was not, in fact, a Scottish man. And so she had him sign as his character, Thomas Leggett. That is not his name. She also believed he was Scottish this whole time. And he helped inspire the book. And that kind of filled me with childish glee.
Wow.
Wait, okay. So everything that she thinks she learned from Sacramento is based on a fictional character of a Scottish man who doesn't exist.
He's a real person who existed, but he died 200 years ago.
Oh,
and
gotcha.
is not, in fact, this tour guide who she believed him to be. She just thought, this tour guide's name is Thomas Leggett, and he's Scottish, but he's really American, and his name is Sean.
So she didn't know that he was playing a character.
No, not at all.
Oh.
That is so funny.
To be fair, he has the best accent out of all of the tour guides, so I understand. But
I would hope so.
The fact that she came back and said, "Will you sign my book? You inspired me," is just so pure.
I'm imagining a situation where she came back and she's like, "Hey, is Thomas Leggett around? I want to talk to him. He like, our conversation was so good," and everybody's like, "What are you talking about?" It's like, Thomas Leggett. Like, I met him last time I was here. It's like, he's been dead for X number of years. Are you okay?
She's been talking to a ghost the whole time.
Yes. Man, do we need to
This
take you
woman
to the
is
Sacramento
insane.
asylum that does not exist?
Yeah. Guess it's time to go to Stockton, folks. No, they immediately knew. They were like, "Oh, you're looking for Sean." I think they broke her heart, but I don't know the details.
That's
Oh.
rough.
I know.
Wow, okay. Okay, the fantasy. I want to talk about the fantasy. Because I would put this more in the vein of like magical realism. I mean, the book goes out of its way to really showcase that there is a veil. There is some sort of like in between. These sisters do have abilities, but this is the skeptic in me. It's based on the author's ancestors. I don't know if I necessarily believe in true mediums. Mediums for me are like the magical realism kind of gray areas. Like maybe they are real. I don't know. But what are your both your reactions to just like the fantasy element, the magical realism element?
You know, I guess I don't. Can you explain magical realism a little bit more?
Yeah, I could try. So I think magical realism, as far as I am aware, is basically real life, but there's like a little bit of is there something else? So it's not like so concrete that dragons are real, there are fairies. It's more of like a story is told where a person went off into magical lands, and at the very end you realize that like they were sleeping. So there's that question mark of, did they really go to these fantasy lands, or is it all just a dream? There's like just enough of a question mark to make you doubt the fantastical element.
Okay.
Erin, do you agree with that? Do you have a better explanation?
I think that's good. I think I just couldn't stop thinking about the TV show Long Island Medium. Personally.
I don't know what that is, but I think I get it already.
I really think you should Google it later. It really was just like, in the beginning, I'm like, okay, so they're all con artists.
Yeah.
And for the most part, I believe that they are and were, you know, until I'm proven wrong, of course. You know, my opinion could change. But I thought it was really fun how they kind of played with, we are con artists, but we're also legit.
Right, that was weird.
Yeah. So I guess I have mixed feelings about it, but do I think mediums can truly reach into the beyond? No. Not particularly.
Yeah, I felt like the author was trying to acknowledge that perhaps a lot of these mediums, these spiritualists, are all con men and con women and con artists. But also she wanted to actually add it as a fact. And there was like, she couldn't really reconcile the two.
Yeah, it kind of felt like she was trying to legitimize her ancestors' profession, even though I'm sure they wouldn't care. They knew who they were.
Yeah, I would just respect the hustle, right? If that's what they were, if they were con artists, hell yeah, good for them.
Well, it's also like in 1885, women did all sorts of jobs, you know?
Right.
And it was still like, yeah, Sacramento was progressive in the sense you could buy, own, sell property and divorce, but you couldn't vote about all that property that you owned. You couldn't like make decisions about the future of your life. You're still expected to do domestic stuff. So women who owned businesses owned, you know, saloons, whorehouses, or they ran the gambit with, you know, the circus. It was like still very limited. I thought it was really upsetting that they kept pushing this character, Mary Sutton, as a surgeon, because there is no way that a woman would have been a doctor. Or I'm sorry, she wasn't a surgeon. There's no way a woman would have been a doctor at this time. It just wasn't happening.
I was genuinely surprised that this book was as strongly feminist as it was.
I was surprised too.
You know, and I mean, I knew nothing about spiritualists. I knew nothing about this era. I really have not researched at all, like, what women were able and not able to. I mean, I know they weren't able to do much, but like, I didn't really know anything about. Yeah. What was the term? Trance readers or
lectures.
Yeah, trance lectures. Like, that was a thing I had quickly Googled. Is that a real thing or is not? And apparently it was a real thing. I was like, that was amazing. Like, that blew my mind. But I just wasn't expecting all that from, as we mentioned, a YA book that I thought was going to be very much of just like these two twin mediums and wanting to bring back their mom or something and then falling in love and the end. So I was actually really pleasantly surprised about that. So I will say that I feel like this book punches up from its YA grading.
Yeah, and then the romance with Laws makes it punch down again.
Okay. Laura, somebody can say something.
No, I was just gonna say I've listened to other podcasts that kind of went into spiritualism and the history behind it and some of the more famous names. It's been a while, so I can't remember a lot of details, but reading this book, it just kind of was cool seeing a little bit of the callbacks to things that I could remember. And I do know that spiritualism was definitely one thing that women were able to do and make money off of and stuff like that. And so I just thought it was a cool way to bring more of the history into this book, is addressing some of that more feministic aspect of the spiritualist, I don't know, movement. I'm not sure what the term was, but I just thought that was cool. But I did catch me by surprise.
Yeah, I feel like you could say it was a movement. I think it kind of took a lot of people by storm, especially the super religious.
Yeah. I love that she briefly mentioned Lincoln, because he was a spiritualist and not very many people know that.
Erin, you mentioned Laws a bit ago. So let's talk about the romance. We can't avoid it.
Yep.
I wish I could.
Was there any elements of that relationship that you enjoyed or no?
This part of the plot felt the weakest to me.
Mm-hmm.
There were so many points when I thought, can we either just commit to this character more or like kill him off? You know,
mm-hmm.
What is his purpose? And then when he kind of gets dragged into the end, it's like a savior thing.
Mm-hmm.
It gave me the ick. I hated this Laws character trying to tell her that her profession was invalid because he was like, oh, be a journalist like me, be respectable. And it's like, dude, you need to stay in your lane. You don't have to like what she's doing, but you certainly don't have to tell her how to live her life. If you really thought it was that much of a problem, you wouldn't be flirting with her and you would have turned her into the police a long time ago. So I think we need to cut that out. But that's just my opinion.
I agree, but I'm also remembering, you know, this is taking place in the 1800s. So I feel like maybe he was a little more progressive, but he still, you know, had this misogynistic mentality. I'm not saying he was a great character. I'm just saying some of the conversations they had, like you should be a journalist, like it comes from a man of privilege that doesn't understand how the system works. And he's young. I think it said that he's 19.
Yeah, it was something like that.
So like he doesn't really know. And so I thought I didn't mind that conversation so much because he's he's saying what he thinks, which in a way was a compliment to her, but also she was like, that's not how it is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And she had to explain it to him, which I feel like is kind of how it is today.
Yep.
Some things never change.
No. I will say I thought it was interesting though that the book is very much, again, feminist, and it leans into how women, kind of implies women don't always need a man. They can live on their own. They need to have, they have their own careers. That's what Edie and Violet are doing, is trying to have their own career. And they mention things like, the inequality between man and woman. But then I thought it was interesting that the author still wrote in this romance where she was still relying on this man.
Yes.
Which
Mhm.
I don't necessarily think is wrong. I think there's a right way to write it, and it felt not that.
Right. Yeah, that was
Yeah.
my biggest issue with that character, is that he felt like we needed a man to be able to do the things.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was like, okay, this book's already a fantasy. Like, sure, maybe a woman would not be able to get into a fake asylum in the 1800s on her own. But figure out a way to make it so that she can. Like, don't just have him conveniently there, and he's the one that comes up with a plan. And I mean, granted, of course, that's another opportunity to force a trope on us. We got the forced proximity in that moment. That all is in service of the romance. But, like, yeah, it just seemed like he was there because we needed a man to do the things. It's like, well, I don't want that in this case. I want her to
figure it out.
Yeah, figure it out. Go be Nancy Drew. Go pick the damn log. Go climb. Go get dirty. Go figure it out on your own.
Yeah, I felt like this was supposed to be a beautiful story about sisterhood, and it became a beautiful story about a romance with a side of sisterhood. I didn't like that. It's like, it kind of feels like you're straying from your messaging.
And in mentioning sisterhood, it didn't even really feel like sisterhood, honestly.
Mm-hmm.
Because they weren't working together in this book until the very end.
Yeah.
So I was a little disappointed in that, because I thought it was going to be the sisters working together on this problem. But really, it was Edie just constantly lying to Violet.
Yeah, and being like, but you have to forgive me because we're sisters. And it's like, no. You lied about some big things, Edie.
Yeah, I was surprised that the sisters didn't work together as much as I expected them to. This was really, I feel like, Edie's book.
Yeah.
Violet was just like,
It only followed Edie.
Yeah. And then it makes sense at the very end when you find out that Edie was the author's great-grandmother. And it's like, oh, so you just wrote about your great-grandmother and didn't really include her sister as much.
Yeah.
It's like, okay.
Well.
Like, yeah, it would have been great to see them both working together, or like, splitting up, and, like Violet wanted to be an actress. It would have been great to see her work in that angle, going to the theater, getting information from that world, and seeing them come together but
she could have used her acting skills to get into the Sacramento Asylum.
Oh my God. I thought they were going to pull a Chewy. I thought that's what the plan was going to be. When he was like, I got a plan, I thought it was going to be, Edie, I need you to pretend like you're insane, and I'm admitting you. And that's how we're getting into the asylum. And then, we'll do what we need to do. Which I would have preferred, honestly. But
Another fanfic.
Add it to the list of fanfics you got to write. Erin, how much of a subscriber to tropes are you? Like, are there certain tropes that, like, you're like, yes, hell yes, this is my thing, or you tend to avoid tropes?
I feel like I can enjoy any trope that is well done, but because, like I said, this felt like such a debut novel because she was trying to do it all, and in the process, she ended up doing a lot of things, maybe not as well as she could have. Okay. I think some tropes that I personally enjoy are, difficult mother-daughter relationship heals. I think that is always so fun to watch, like, play out, and it usually ends very sweetly. I think another good trope, if you must have romance, is friends to lovers, because the whole enemies to lovers thing just fills me with rage. You should never hate someone that you are going to end up loving.
That's a great basis for a relationship.
Again, this, my opinion, everyone can believe what they want, but not a fan of the enemies to lovers thing. I think that's why I had such an issue with the Law's character. It rubbed me the wrong way.
Yeah.
I feel like I like both enemies and friends to lovers, but I feel like I like enemies to lovers more because I like the fact that they know each other at their worst and they still come to love each other.
Do they know each other at their worst, or are they projecting the worst onto the other person?
We don't need to get into the detail of that stuff.
You can't bring it up and then not want to get into it.
Don't argue.
I'm comparing.
Okay, no questions. Okay.
I'm comparing. I like friends to lovers to a certain point because I also just really like really good friendships. And sometimes I feel like friendships are ruined when they become lovers.
I feel the opposite. I feel like the anticipation of the friends to lovers trope is way more fun than the enemies to lovers trope, because one, it's sweeter, and two, you know that if you can make it as friends and there's like that X factor, it'll probably work out. But with enemies to lovers, when they like figure out that they like each other and then I close the book, I'm like, they're getting divorced in my head, you know? That'll never work.
I could see that. I could see that in some of these. Okay. Jason?
I think of the two, I prefer friends to lovers. Really, my favorite is rivals to lovers.
Okay.
Because I feel like that gives us a little bit of like the spice of enemies to lovers, but it's like, they have the mutual respect. Like they don't dislike each other. They're just like gunning for the same thing, and I feel like that's more fun to read. But friends to lovers I do enjoy because, and I hear what you're saying, Laura. Like I do love when characters, and we've talked about this in the past, of like characters can stay platonic and just stay friends, and that's really nice because I feel like that's not as
we don't see that often.
Yeah. But let's say we have to go down the lovers route. I like the friends to lovers because as me, the audience looking in, I like seeing all the little cues there of like them liking each other but being too dense to really identify it themselves. And I like seeing those switches turn on slowly and then finally they get there, and that's always fun. But with like Erin, like you said, I'm not a huge enemies to lovers person. So I didn't like this relationship in this book. If someone's listening to this right now and you love enemies to lovers, you might feel very differently than us. But Laura?
let me ask you now though, what makes Laws an enemy?
His staunch opposition of her in the first half of the book, probably, where he's just like, "You are my enemy. I'm going to report on this. You're just in my way." He demeans her. He's so rude and kind of just treats her like she's worthless. And then all of a sudden he's like, "But I like you now. So trust me." I hate that.
She's a woman. Instant enemy.
Yeah.
No, his story about how a spiritualist basically robbed his mom and caused her death, right? So, and that's what she is. So she has to be an enemy because you're the bad guy.
Well, I feel like he kind of lies in the middle of maybe rival, because really he's trying to prove that mediums aren't real. And so, he was being like that to her, but also there were times when he's actually being respectful in a way, in not a not a great way in terms of communicating with her. But he he sees how she is intelligent, right? And so we kind of see that when he understands, he starts to understand who she is, mentally, her personality. I feel like the way that he sees her changed to where he wasn't really quite enemy. It's just his goal is to prove that mediums don't exist.
So they're rival me's?
Yes.
I'll accept it. Yeah, I like that.
That still completely undermines her profession. Instant enemy.
Whatever we call it, I feel like this is dependent on a trope, and I feel like a lot of YA is dependent on tropes, and that's usually my biggest hiccup with YA, which sucks because I feel like YA descriptions are really cool, and there's so many YA books. I'm like, man, that sounds like it'd be an amazing story if you just got rid of the love story in there, and you gave people a little more agency and worked on your writing style. Otherwise, I'd love it.
Okay.
I agree. There were so many always, never, and forever written into this book. It drove me insane. Like, no, you will not be together forever. You will not love them always. Like, cut it out. Be a person. Talk like a real person. Like, the dialogue in this book was so unrealistic. I think that's why it was so YA cringy, because it was just like, who has conversations like these?
Teens? I don't know.
How old are they supposed to be? Oh, it says 17.
I think 17, maybe. I wasn't convinced that they were real humans. Yeah, and I think that was my biggest issue.
That's fair. No, that's fair. I mean, but again, we have the benefit of reading it from 2023, whereas like these are characters that exist in 1800s, and I think the idea of you just get married. That's what you have in life. That's the expectation. Is like you just find somebody and you get married and you be a good wife and you go provide as a husband. The end. So I guess in that sense, it's a little more accurate. But yeah, as us reading it now, it's like leaves a lot to be desired.
I had issues with their secret. I mean, not their secret. Their runaway identities. Because they mention at one point that they don't want people to know their real names, but their dad, their father, in the end, still calls them Edie and Violet.
I think it was referring to their last names, but they never clarified what the last name was. Like, you could tie it together at least at the end.
I feel like they should have ran farther away. Because I think it said that they're from Marysville, which is not far.
Okay, but back then that may.
But they should they're recognizable. They are twins with drastically different hair colors. They should not stay in California.
Yeah, you could have gotten on a steamship.
They mentioned they went to Chicago. Like, stay there.
That was also like highly unrealistic.
It is.
Like, you could just take a casual trip to Chicago in 1885. Like, you would be there for a good chunk of time.
And possibly die on the way there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, exactly.
Or back. Yeah, also, don't stay in the same profession. It doesn't matter where you go. If you're going to go to Chicago, don't do what you do because, again, twins that are easily recognizable who are spiritualists, doesn't matter where you are, you're going to be the same twins.
Yeah, they were terrible at witness protection. Not their calling.
Hold on, I'm doing a quick Google search. Witness protection was invented in 1970. So,
you had issues. Good luck.
Yeah.
Have fun. The 1800s is when it was easy to move to a different state and just change your name and profession, and then nobody's going to know who you are.
Yeah.
People who would just become doctors and not get any medical training. They just went outside, changed the sign. That's how easy it was to reinvent yourself. But I agree. Like, at least go to a different state. This runaway was really pathetic.
Even San Francisco is too close.
It's too accessible. People went from Sacramento to San Francisco all the time.
Go to Tracy. No one's going to look for you in Tracy.
People in Tracy are crying now.
One of our listeners in Tracy. First of all, thanks for listening. But
So sorry. We came for you.
Come on.
Haven't really talked about our villain and this whole shadow thing.
Oh, you're
that they
right.
go on and on about.
Oh, yeah, fair. So who was the villain? Mary Sutton?
Yeah.
Mary Sutton, and then surprisingly their father, who was possessed.
Oh, what a twist. I did not see the dad coming back. Yeah, as much as I did enjoy the story overall, but it was very predictable. There were a couple surprises, but all in all, like everything you thought would happen happened, including the Mary Sutton reveal that she was the bad guy, the dad coming back.
The thallium.
How the herbs are
that
used.
she was thinking. Yeah.
Yeah, I thought the rules for which herbs did what was very. I thought it was creative. It was funny that they were so specific about what they did. I felt like they were like Uno cards, because one of them was really was literally a reverse card. Doesn't matter what you have, it just reverses what it does.
This is why I wanted more of the magical fantasy stuff, because I feel like there's a lot more to learn about the veil.
Mm-hmm.
And there's only so many times that she's gone into it in this book.
Mm-hmm.
We got to learn a little bit about the shadow. It's like if the person leaves the veil and goes back to the living world and leaves the shadow behind, right?
Mm-hmm.
The shadow is like the worst thing that can exist. But it didn't really feel like the bad guy. Like, we knew it was bad, like, but it wasn't like really conveyed, because they were just, she was trying to do her investigation in the living world and didn't have too many actual interactions with this shadow until the end. And then that ended up being, they got saved by a man.
Yep. Yeah, the fight scenes were really underwhelming.
Also, go ahead.
She was kind of just like, and then I held the shadow there. Like, what? And then her dad shows up, and this man they're painting as being this super religious guy, the whole book, ends up just passively accepting that everything he believed was wrong. That would never happen. He would be looking around like, I am in purgatory. He's a minister. But instead he's like, oh yes, daughter, teach me about all of the things I was wrong about, even though I was so religious that I threatened to send you to an insane asylum because I couldn't grasp the thought of my ideas being wrong. That gave me issue.
As it should.
I wanted the girls to live, but also the book is called The Second Death of Edie and Violet Bond. And they've said multiple times in the book, the second death is your final death. So I expected them to die.
I get it. Where's the tie-in?
Yeah, I was trying to think about that. I was thinking about the title and how I was like, what exactly is it alluding to? Like, is there a second death that's more figurative, right? Would the first death have been when their mom died and they changed their identities and ran away? And is the second death now that story has wrapped up and now they get to start their third lives, their final lives? Is that what the second death is?
The pessimist in me thinks that Glaze's publishing company just kind of skimmed this book and then forced this title upon her, because it makes absolutely no sense to me. Where is the dying?
You're saying they glazed over it?
One might say they glazed.
I mean, I know sometimes, publishers are the ones that come in and force title changes and stuff. So maybe the author had a better title that actually made sense.
I feel like we're getting back into our habit with this episode of I liked it, but here's all the things that I didn't like, but also it was still enjoyable.
Yeah, we'd have a bad habit of doing that. Yeah.
Easy to be a critic.
I just want to say I did enjoy reading this book. Like I just wish that I had more of the sisters working together. Yeah. That's what I wanted to see.
Yeah. Agreed.
But yeah, that and a little bit more of the magical stuff I would have liked to see.
I did think it was really easy to read. It did have some surprises. Like I said, I mentioned there's some predictable stuff, but it had some surprises that generally kind of got me. I enjoyed that. For the most part, I enjoyed the characters. I did like the relationship between the sisters. I wish there'd just been more of that. I thought the villain reveal was a little two-dimensional for me, but it worked. And as far as YA writing, so I felt like it was a solid YA book. I think if you like the genre and you like the things that make this book what it is, you probably would really enjoy this book. So if you like the rival me still lovers, if you like historical fantasy, if you like paranormal, and especially with it's September now, I felt like this was a great vibes book. Like this gave me the vibes I wanted for right now. Like not full horror, but definitely kind of creepy and spooky and otherworldly. And so I thought it did everything that it set out to do. All right. Was it amazing? Was it mind-blowing? No. But I think it is a solid debut book, especially as a debut book. I think it was a solid entry. So there you go. I'll end it with some positive stuff.
I will say, for all of my slashing, I do think this book taught me some things, which I did enjoy. I think I just wanted more focus. And I think I also teed up for it poorly because what I was reading before this is a classic. So I moved from a classic to a YA, and then I was analyzing the writing being a total snob because I had a horrible tee up. But I do think that this would be a really fun read for anyone who lives in Sacramento and wants to learn a little bit more about the area or women's rights in the area, stuff like that.
Yeah, it's a good point.
And I was also thinking, I think this would make a decent miniseries. Like there was the writing, I felt like was very cinematic. Like there was an actual jump cut in the book. I remember she said maybe Edie's like, I'm never gonna, and you immediately cut to her doing the thing, which is like very much a visual gag, right? And so if you translated this into a miniseries and flesh out a little bit more of the stuff, you can flesh out the love story, make that stronger. You can flesh out some of the villains. I do think this would be a good adaptation. So I'll say that as well.
That would be pretty fun to see. Old Sacramento kind of stuff.
All right. I mentioned this earlier, but again, I just want to point out if you didn't read this book, or if you did read this book, but one of those people who doesn't read the author's notes, this book was inspired by the author's great-grandmother, Edie, and her twin sister, Violet. The author discovered that both Edie and Violet were avid spiritualists who regularly conducted seances. So I think it's really cool that these women did exist. They were spiritualists. Erin and I have stated that we don't necessarily believe in that, but they did it. They were out there doing the thing, respect them for that. And I think that's really cool that this author is able to find someone in their history to create a book out of. And so that's awesome.
And she included the photo that she first saw of Edie and Violet in her author's note. That was really cool to see.
Yeah. Which is properly spooky just because it's old.
Yeah.
And you know how long they had to sit for it. You're like, they were so brave.
Yeah.
All right. So this book is currently rated 3.88 out of over 998 ratings. So almost 1,000 ratings, not a whole lot. And it's an average rating. Laura, what would you rate this book?
I would give it a 3.5. Again, I enjoyed it. There were a lot of things that I think could have been better. But it was again, it was her first novel. I enjoyed the Sacramento mentions. So yeah, I'd say 3.5. So that's about in line with the average.
All right. Erin, what about you?
I think it was a solid 3 for the YA category. I feel like I've seen better in the YA category at convincing me of teen love. So that is part of why I'm docking it. I'm also docking it because I did want to see some plot lines fleshed out a little more. But overall, it was fun to read and generally interesting.
All right. I would give it probably like a 3.75.
Okay.
I tend to be forgiving
Technical.
of things. Yeah, I know. Not quite a 4. I can't give it a 4, but 3.5 even feels a little too low for me. I tend to be forgiving of like YA books sometimes, which isn't necessarily should be the case, but it is. And mostly because of the vibes. Like if you got rid of the fact that I'm reading this in September, I probably would read it lower. But I think this was a good time to read it, just as we're going into darker weather. Yeah, and the time of the year, my favorite time of the year. So yeah, 3.75.
Okay, fair.
All right. What is some of the shit we're reading next? Erin, you had mentioned, I think you said Wayward and Halloween Party next for you, right?
Yep, that's what's in the cards. Probably going to read Halloween Party first. I think I need a break from the witchy theme, but don't worry, I'll be diving right back in like a week.
Laura, what's next for you?
I don't really do the themed reads very often. So I'm actually gonna read Chasm by Stacey McEwen next. Thank you to Angry Robot. They provided us with an arc. As of recording this, the book is already released. So everybody go pick up the first book, Ledge, and then also Chasm. Ledge was actually really good. I really enjoyed it. So I'm very excited to read Chasm. And just for anybody who is on Instagram or TikTok often, you might recognize Stacey McEwen. She's very well known in the book talk and bookstagram community. She's very funny. So yeah, so she released these 2 books. I don't know if there's a third. I'll find out. So excited for this sequel.
I think there will be a third. I think I've heard her say trilogy.
Yeah. Okay. Good for her. I'm excited for her.
After I finish Halloween Party, I'm going to be reading Magpie Murders by Anthony Horowitz, Halloween Parties by Agatha Christie, and Magpie Murders is very much, I guess, trying to be Agatha Christie. Erin, I know you read it. You kind of talked to me about it. And so I felt like it'd be nice to kind of combine the two. The book weaves a classic whodunit worthy of Agatha Christie into a chilling, ingeniously original modern-day mystery. So we'll see. I've read other stuff by the same author. He's written a couple sanctioned sequels to Sherlock Holmes, I think, which I have read and I enjoyed, including one that followed Moriarty, not Sherlock. I think it's called Moriarty. And he's also written, I think, a few sanctioned sequels to James Bond as well, which I haven't read. I haven't read any James Bond. But so, I mean, the Brits like him. I don't know if he is British, but anyhow. So we'll see. We'll see how I like it. Erin, I don't think you liked it too much.
Well,
but we'll see.
I'm a snob. I'm such a snob. And because I read the preface and it said, this is so Agatha Christie, I could not stop thinking about how derivative it was the entire time I was reading it. It just kind of killed it for me. But other people might like that. I was focusing on it too much because it said that in the beginning.
All right, well, where you're a snob, I am a whore, and I like books, so I'll probably like this fine.
Teach their own, right?
All right, before we close up, I do want to say that our next episode for next month, which is going to be October, so of course we're going to do a Halloween spooky book, is She is a Haunting by Trang Tan Tran, which is a chilling, evocative, and atmospheric debut horror novel about a Vietnamese-American girl visiting her estranged father in Vietnam and the house that doesn't want them to leave.
Ooh.
Laura, you're the one that kind of brought this to our attention. Sounded fun, sounded right up our alley, super spooky vibes, and so hopefully
The cover is what got me first.
Yeah, kind of getting body horror vibes from it. That's always unsettling.
Yeah.
All right, Erin, before we wrap up, would you like to tell people where they can follow the Sac History Museum, a little bit more about what they do, and maybe some upcoming events they have going on?
Yeah. If you want to know what's going on with the Sacramento History Museum, you can check them out at Sac History Museum on pretty much every platform. Their TikTok is huge because of Howard in the print shop. So he's fun to watch if you're into that sort of thing. And I really encourage you to check out our underground tours, especially our after hours underground tours, which is a little bit more of the seedier side of Sacramento, where you can learn about the gambling, the prostitution, the general deviancy of early Sacramento that was not really happening on the East Coast. So if you're into those things, you can find me there. I'm probably going to be your tour guide. And if you do want to know about what I'm reading, I'm on Goodreads. I'm sure maybe we can link that or something.
Yeah, we'll
but
link it.
Since it's kind of hard to do usernames with Goodreads because it's a useless app, but I'm on there. And that's about it for me.
Nice.
Laura, I think we need to do one of the after hours.
I agree.
I highly encourage you to check that one out if you like hearing about the saucier side of the city.
Hell yeah. Oh, thank you for sharing that. Seriously, anybody listening, if you're ever in the Sacramento area, I highly encourage you to check out the Sacramento History Museum. I promise I'm not saying that just because Erin's here. I've done their underground tour once years ago and actually just did the paranormal investigation that they offer sometimes. I did that a couple weeks ago, which coincidentally had Erin as one of the tour guides, and I didn't even know she was going to be there. But that was a lot of fun. So yeah, they offer some other things like Erin mentioned, so check it out if you get a chance. And if you've read this book and want to share your thoughts with us, or if you've seen a ghost in Sacramento, want to tell us where we can find it, so we can have our own ghost sighting. You can find us on Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, Threads. Sorry, let me rephrase that. It's not Twitter anymore. It's X, whatever.
Yeah.
And yeah, but you can find us at Shit We've Read, pretty much wherever. So that's it for this episode. Erin, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks,
I'm super excited
Erin.
to have had you on.
Of course. I'm so happy we did this. This was fun. You made me, expand my palette. So I think it was good for me.
You're welcome, and I think I'm sorry.
It's fun. It's okay.
Laura, always great chatting with you.
You also.
All right, and to everybody else listening, thanks for tuning in. Have a happy spooky season, and we'll see you next time.
Bye.
Shit We've Read is hosted by Laura Benson, Jason Rico, and Bello Romero, with music by Joshua Chilton and editing by Jason Rico.
To join the discussion on this and all other books we've read, find us at Shit We've Read on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and TikTok.
For more information about us or to request transcripts, please visit shitwe'veread.com.
This podcast is part of the Bilo Network. Visit bilonetwork.com for more great geeky podcasts.
Thanks so much for listening.